Welcome back to the Abundant Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Pereira. I'm here with my friend Paul Fugelsang, and it's going to be kind of a different kind of conversation than usual. Paul and I are friends. We were having breakfast the other day, and he was just being so wise. It's like, I want everybody to hear your wisdom about this stuff because people need it. You're a smart, wise man. So I will say, what started this breakfast is Paul is out of all the people I know, he knows the most about plant medicine, about um, just like the hallucinogenic world in mental health. I feel like of the people in my circle. And so I was feeling not myself, and I was feeling like I was not making sense of what was going on with me. And I thought, well, here's one thing I haven't tried. So I'll ask Paul which road I should go down. And do you want to tell them what you told me?
Um, well, I think for starters, thank you for the kind words. I want to say that truthfully, I feel like I'm just another person on this earth trying to find my way through, and I frequently don't feel very wise. I frequently feel very confused, actually, um, and like the rest of us, I'm simply doing my best. Um,
Hmm.
but thank you for what you said. So when you brought up doing plant medicine, I immediately paused a little bit. I have a lot of skepticism about this world and what's happening in it. And years ago, I was very taken with it, and I think there was some very well-natured youthful naivete that was sort of driving me. It's very exciting. It's a very seductive place. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of it. And I also have a lot of skepticism, and I think that there's a lot of tricky aspects that people aren't really considering, and that people who are promoting it aren't really considering. So automatically, I sort of take pause when people bring up plant medicine. And in addition to that, I think that what you came to me with, which is what most of our clients come to us with, and what I came to my therapist with when I started, is a notion of I'm suffering right now, and I would like to no longer be suffering. So what can I do so that I am no longer suffering?
Hmm.
Am I getting it so far?
100%,
Okay.
100%.
Okay. And I think that that's wired into us. And I think that we're wired to seek comfort, and we're wired to avoid displeasure. And I think that in addition to our biology, certainly our culture is one that very much supports the notion that if everything isn't great, and if that we're not happy, something is drastically wrong and needs to be fixed or improved, which is like saying there's something drastically wrong with you that needs to be fixed. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't think that we're broken, and I don't think that we are problems to be solved. I think that suffering is an inherent aspect of life, and I think that the harder we try to get rid of it, the more it seems to stick around. And I think right now what we see in the wellness industry, and we see it a lot in psychedelics, and we see it a lot in psychotherapy as well, is this notion that that something is wrong, and that the fact that you're suffering is wrong. Let's figure out what we can do. Um, it seems to me that there's a lot of problems with this, but two real problems are one is that suffering, like I just mentioned, is a reality in life that I don't think we're ever going to escape. And two is that I think that within the suffering, there's tremendous capacity for transformation, and that we're actually not going to really find transformation unless we go through that, which is difficult. And like I said, we don't live in a culture that supports that, nor do we have many mentors out there who can help us really successfully navigate this stuff. So I'm left feeling a lot of compassion and empathy for all of us in this place.
Hmm. It's, it's interesting because even like at the tail end of this conversation we'd had at breakfast, I was still like, okay, so I can get with suffering, but like, how do I make it so the suffering is less suffery? Like I was
Yeah.
still trying to find some trick to make it not so bad. Which of course I'm going to look for that, right? Like we're all looking for less suffering. Um, and there's no escape.
Yeah, there's no escape, but there's also, it's worth noting that what you're talking about, that there's wisdom in that too. I think sometimes our suffering can be so overwhelming, and we can be so alone in it and so unpracticed with how to work with it, that there's not much that we can actually do within it. So I think that
Right.
this desire to lessen it, to turn down the heat a little bit, makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that if we can do this, and if it allows us to be more skillful in our work with the suffering, then it's probably very worthwhile.
Hmm. And I think about how like other people's suffering, whether you're a therapist or a parent or whatever, like I'm also trying to take away other people's
Yeah.
suffering in a way that isn't going to solve it for them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and how, especially, well, I see it mostly in my life as a therapist and as a parent, but primarily as a parent. Um, in trying to eradicate that suffering, I end up causing more long term because then there's less resiliency, there's less experience sitting with the feelings because mom made it better.
Yeah,
And with that lack of experience comes more suffering when things are harder.
yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I do the same thing all the time as a parent. It's such an easy trap to fall into. And so I would agree with everything you said. And then also additionally, if we actually can get to a place where we change our mindset to the place where we view our suffering as a gift, or we view it as a visitor from the beyond who's come to offer us something, that generally can entail an expansion of consciousness. In other words, where our lives can become more fuller because of the suffering, then we're taking that away as well from people.
Hmm. Thinking about like the direct correlation there of like life will be better as I move through this. Like there is some sort of transformation potentially on the other side of this or the next suffering is part of what I've been thinking lately to get through.
Mhm.
And it's still rooted in turning down the heat of the suffering.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
just working with what I got.
Right, right. And I hate to be discouraging, and I hope it doesn't come across as too discouraging, but maybe it will be better, and maybe it won't after you get through the suffering.
Right.
My belief is that if we can engage with it consciously as opposed to blindly, that after we move through it, life will be richer in some way. There'll be a deeper connection to our experience, to the mystery of what it is that it is to be alive, to the mystery of what's happening all around us, that our lives may not be better, between quotes, or we may not be happier between quotes, but our lives will be more rich and more full as a result.
Hmm. I think about some of the ways that I used to practice when I was a newer therapist and how I would often try to take suffering away in the
Mhm.
context of this session, where, yeah, I would try to throw techniques at them or worksheets or, the different ways to help them pop themselves out of the suffering. Or I would sometimes rely on platitudes. Um,
Mhm.
Hopefully none of the really bad ones, but the ones that just ultimately aren't aligned with the fact that we all suffer and that's just the way it goes. And platitudes are never very deep or helpful ultimately, but thinking about how that was rooted in my own discomfort with somebody that I care about suffering.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And also because, from a very well-intentioned place, you'd like to reduce suffering for others. And
Hmm.
and I think that this is a very, very noble aspiration that we have. And it's just a question of how we go about doing that. And it sort of
Hmm.
feels like trying to yank it out of someone's hands maybe isn't going to be the most effective
Right,
approach.
right. Unless we want to create some sort of sick reliability,
Yeah.
um,
And I think
which,
it's also worth noting that when clients come in, that there's a very powerful induction to actually do this, right?
mhm,
We're all inducing each other to do stuff to get our own needs met all the time.
yeah.
It's all happening below the surface, below the sphere of our awareness, but this is how we seem to operate, one of the ways we seem to operate. So when a client comes down and sits down, there's a very, very powerful induction coming from them to take away their pain. And
Hmm.
and the desire to meet that, of course, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah. Versus coming from this perspective of like, how do we dance with the suffering? And just be with it and
Yeah,
accept
how
that
do we
it's
relate
there.
with it consciously as if it's something that maybe is a mystery that has the potential to unlock something important inside of us?
Hmm. Yeah. You've talked about mystery a few times, both in our restaurant conversation and this one.
Yeah.
Um, it's I think my dad will bring up mystery too, and I admit I am not curious about the mysteries.
Yeah.
So for other people who are listening who are like, I don't really want to know about like the greater consciousness, I just want to not feel like shit.
Yeah. Of
Um, that's okay too. Like I get that. I
course.
get that.
Yeah.
And we're all in it together trying, right? Like
Yeah.
consciously or unconsciously, we're all having some sort of relationship with suffering.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I came to you for advice on like which um fix was going to be the best fit for me with psychedelics.
Yeah.
And you were like, it's not going to solve your problem. Like I know you're trying not to suffer, and I get that.
Yeah.
Um, it was so helpful to me because I realized and I will do this when I'm suffering in any way where I'll throw everything at it. I
Hmm.
will do everything I need to do. If it's a health thing, I'm doing the allopathic, I'm doing the naturopathic, I'm doing the everything, um, to try to make it go away. And it's it's going to pop up again in another way, the suffering.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if I saw that. And it's not to say things don't get quote unquote fixed. Like people listening to this, it's a practice building podcast and they are trying to build their practice. It's not to say your practice won't get full, but life is not going to be perfect because your practice is full. There will be suffering, sometimes within your business, sometimes having nothing to do with your business. And that's that. Like that's the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it seems to be that one thing that's happening is we're confronted with a series of challenges throughout our entire lives here, really from the moment we come into the world to the moment we leave. Um, that it seems like we may have a behavior that we isolate and view and realize that is really problematic and really increasing our suffering. And we work really, really hard to understand that behavior and clear it up. And maybe if we're fortunate, we actually can, and that complex can get loosened or it can get transformed and turned into something else. And suddenly that's not something that's dogging us anymore. But if we give it a little bit of time, we notice that right down the road, there's another challenge waiting for us, and really that's
Mhm.
going to be demanding of our attention. And the more we try to run away from it, the ladder it knocks on the door, it seems.
Yeah.
uh, and in terms of mystery and your dad, and I'll say that this is really one of I think the very positive aspects of psychedelics that psychedelics can bring. We live in such a materialist culture where we've been so separated from any idea of spirit or any idea of a relationship with the unseen world. And certainly for those that felt like that they were damaged by the religion that they were brought up in, there's not really much there to hold them or to catch them, so they end up living these very agnostic or atheistic lives. And if that's someone's predilection, of course that's fine. I know that I lived that way for a very long time, and I know that my life is much fuller now that I am in relationship with what I might call the unseen world. And I think that that's one thing that psychedelics can present. It can actually say, hey, there is this mystery that's all around us, and that
Mhm.
is it is very, very rich and very, very layered and sort of just waiting for us to come and dance with it and be in relationship with it. And I do think that the more we turn our back on that, and the more we turn our back on asking these questions like, what is all this?
Mhm.
What is going on here? Who are we? Who am I? Um, the more we turn our back on these questions, I think the more isolated we can tend to feel, and the more impoverished we can feel.
Mhm.
So I don't think that psychedelics are bad or that everyone should stay away or anything of the sort. I just think that it's a very, very complex, tricky issue, but certainly I think they come with a lot of benefits for people.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think about, so I was just at my mastermind with my business coach, and we had people in there who had things solved that many people in the world are trying to solve, right? Like never having to worry about money ever again, right? We
Uh-huh.
had 4 billionaires in the room,
Wow.
I don't know what you call 100 millionaire, those folks, but um, in talking to them, it was very interesting of like, well, what is it like to really never ever have to worry? Like it'd be impossible for you to spend all this money. Um, and one of the guys was like, I have been in an existential crisis ever since.
Yeah.
I am less happy.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not something I can say to most people. But I am less happy than I was before I had this limitless financial security. Um, and it was a good wake up because I think a lot of us, especially with money, think, well, if I never had to worry about money again, I would like life would be easy.
Yeah.
And I mean, that side of life maybe would be easy, but that's just a really small part of life ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. I have this sneaking suspicion that one reason why we're so enthralled with celebrity gossip and celebrity meltdowns is that we have this unconscious idea that, oh, if only I had all of that, if only I had the beauty and the fame and the looks and the adoration from all these people, then my suffering would be over. And then when we
Mhm.
see that these people are very publicly suffering, it sort of it punctures that bubble a little bit, that illusion that we've created around it.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first consciousness I had around that was when Winona Ryder got caught shoplifting a
Yeah,
million years ago. I mean, I
yeah,
think I was in my 20s or something. And she was a little older than me and I'd always looked up to her. She'd always been like my favorite actress. And I was like, but she can afford all that. I don't understand. And
yeah.
it was such people were so mean about it, but she was like, I have depression. Like,
Mhm.
and to be everything that I wanted to be as a teenager, right? Like she was my goalpost and to be like, wow, there is no reaching it. There is no
Yeah,
reaching it, whatever it is.
yeah.
Um, so I guess in my 20s, I got that there was some suffering that goes on
Yeah,
forever
and
and ever.
it often results in symptomatic behavior, and I think symptomatic behavior is often very threatening for people because it reminds us of our own symptomatic behavior, which
Mhm,
we're very ashamed of typically, which we try to really lock away and not let anybody see. So I think that oftentimes that's why people can react so caustically when they see somebody else showing symptomatic behavior. And I mean, I get that as an actual reaction, and what would it be to instead I view it as a manifestation of someone's pain,
mhm,
and every bit as deserving of compassion as we are of our pain and the stuff that we're ashamed of.
mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of my favorite businesses that happens to be local, but they ship everywhere. Place Spark. I don't know if you know them. It's an OT
No.
and a speech therapist, SLP, who work primarily with kids with disabilities, and they have a T-shirt line. And they just had a T-shirt that came out yesterday that says "Non-compliance is self-advocacy." And
Ah,
I thought, huh, yeah, I
yeah.
can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if I'm understanding it correctly, I think that this whole act of asking these questions, like what is going on here, and
Mhm.
where are we, and what is all of this, I think that that's an act of non-compliance, right? I
Mhm.
think the popular culture wants you to get in the stream and not ask questions, and
Yeah.
just show up and clock in and clock out and go home and watch your TV and go to bed. Um,
Mhm.
but the questions are of course very, very threatening. And I would
Yeah.
agree that I think the questions are often a form of self-advocacy in terms of saying, no,
Mhm.
I want actually something bigger than this very, very small thing that I'm doing.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm curious about other ways for those who are not interested in psychedelics to expand that side of themselves. What are some other, I mean, is it as simple as just asking yourself these questions, frequently, maybe journaling about them, having conversations with friends who are willing to go there? What do you see as helpful?
Yeah, I guess I'm not too sure. I think that all of those things you just mentioned make sense. I, I think that nature is probably our greatest gateway into this experience of a larger consciousness.
Mhm.
And of course, we're part of nature, right? And our breath is part of nature. Um,
Mhm.
so it occurs to me that if we're looking to open up to something bigger than our very small narrative about ourselves or our lives, um, that being outside and being still are probably very wonderful places to start. And it's hard to be still if we don't have any practice at it.
Mhm.
You know, our minds really, really want to move and move and move. And So I always recommend, if you just take 5 minutes and sit quietly and try to be still, or try to focus on, the bark of a tree or what the blade of grass feels like, and set a timer, just 5 minutes, and then you can go extending. But certainly I think all the things that you mentioned, I think faith communities can be really helpful and really important. Meditation. There's all sorts of ways. I feel like this other world is just waiting for us to come and ask for its attention. And the moment we do, then it wants to rise to greet us. So I think even just asking that question, like, oh, I would like to be in a relationship with something that's unseen, I think that we can automatically feel a shift when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We were like, is this podcast going to work? Because it's such a deep topic that requires like a lot more conversation than we're able to have in
Yeah.
20-ish minutes. But I feel like it's a good start for people to think a little more deeply and consider some of these routes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think so
yeah.
too. And of course, psychotherapy, we shouldn't leave this out. As those
Mhm.
of us who work as therapists, we're in such a wonderful position to help welcome people into a world that is that's a little bigger.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
really
Allison.
appreciate it. And I feel like I didn't mention that you are the founder of Open Path. And I want to put that out there that if you want to take sliding scale, or you have interactions with people who need sliding scale and you don't offer it, Open Path is what I use. It is what I've used for years. And it's a really good way of giving back to the community. And yeah, I'm not trying to make it a pitch about Open Path. And I know you wouldn't, but I do want to put it out there because I
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
y'all.
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time and sharing a fraction of what we talked about to hopefully open some eyes.
Yeah, thanks, Allison.
Take care.
Yeah, bye.